Valerie Bowling. I'm the director of the R&D Leadership Summit, and I'm here with one of our presenters. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Roach, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at Momenta Pharmaceuticals. So welcome, Jim, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Valerie. Pleasure.
You are talking about biosimilars at the program, and I wanted to ask you, why is this such a hot topic?
Well, that's a great question. I think for many reasons, actually. From a regulatory perspective, it's really the first new pathway that's been implemented in the United States in many years. We had the traditional generic drug pathway. We had the new drug pathway. No pathway that could allow an abbreviated way to develop biologics because you had the BLA, right, as opposed to an NDA route. And so it is very exciting because it affords, I think, a business opportunity for many companies who may be interested in developing these drugs. But more importantly, I think when you consider the overall cost of healthcare and how much the cost of biologics are contributing to that, as well as from a patient access perspective, many patients don't currently have access to biologics. I think people who are really excited about developing biosimilars are looking at this to both contribute to healthcare policy, if you will, and the cost of healthcare, but again, most importantly, to provide another means by which patients may have access to these drugs.
Okay. Now, is it true to say that we're further ahead in Europe than the U.S., or can you share with us what the differences are between biosimilars and what's happening in Europe versus U.S.?
Sure, and that again, I think there are different perspectives on that. There's no question that Europe is far ahead in terms of the time that they've been spending on biosimilars and the availability of the biosimilars pathway. They took the lead in putting together an abbreviated pathway for companies to be able to get biosimilars on the market. And they've been thinking about this maybe for, somewhere between 10 and 12 years, I think. And there are approved biosimilars on the market in Europe. To that extent, they're definitely ahead. I think another way in which EU is ahead is that you're starting to see regulators publish articles in peer-reviewed journals on the benefits of biosimilars and what biosimilars are. They're taking a lead role in education, and I understand FDA has been looking at that and really wants to assume their own leadership position, you will, from an educational perspective. From a scientific perspective, I think that the FDA pathway, or the 351K pathway, could be a little more progressive, and it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. Specifically, although, as I understand it, the law in Europe would allow for a biosimilar to come to market with appropriate non-clinical or clinical data, meaning there could be a chance that you could come to market without any clinical data. Clearly, the EU guidances call for clinical data, whereas in the United States, the statute allows for the waiver of any particular requirement if the science will support it. And so it could be that there'll be a scenario where FDA might allow a biosimilar to market with less clinical data than the EU would require.
Okay.
And we'll see how that plays out.
Do you think we will see a biosimilar substitute?
I certainly do. And there are many different ways to get there. You may have noticed that recently, I want to say about a month ago, I understand that France now has actually put into law a mandate that any approved biosimilars will be substitutable, which is a very interesting development. Okay. But I think probably the nature of your question was more, do we think that we can get from a scientific standpoint to develop a biosimilar such that it will meet the rigorous FDA requirements for interchangeability? And interchangeability, as an aside, is really much more of an issue in the United States than it is in Europe. That's another difference, actually.
Okay.
We're all eagerly awaiting the interchangeability draft guidance. I think many companies have been, again, eagerly awaiting that to see what FDA is thinking.
I would imagine,
And I think the real question to me is not if, but rather when. I think that certainly over time, whether you have to get to interchangeability through perhaps larger long clinical trials, or whether there'll be more comfort with the FDA looking at a quality package, an analytical and biocharacterization similarity package, absent clinical trials, it's only a matter of time to me.
So what do you hope for the future of biosimilars? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope that the pathways, both in the United States and in Europe, are implemented in such a way that it will be feasible for companies to meet the requirements. I hope that there will be increasingly more global harmonization of requirements between Europe and the United States, because really, companies want to pursue global development programs, and it's far more efficient and feasible to be able to align the requirements in all of the regions, so you only have to do one global development program. But again, most importantly, what I hope for biosimilars is that they will become available because of the added benefits to the healthcare system and to patients.
Right, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with me and talking to us about some of the obstacles and the future biosimilars.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We're very excited. Thank you.
Thank you.